In 2013, Heather Elvis went missing from Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. She spoke to her roommate, then left her home at 2:32 a.m., never to be seen or heard from again by her friends or family. Her disappearance shook a community and left it with more questions than answers. Police untangled a web of a secret affair, obsession, drama, and jealousy. Hello, welcome back to my channel where I deep dive into true crime, paranormal phenomena. Without further ado, let's get into today's case. This is Missing Monday, where I will be discussing the disappearance of Heather Elvis. This is her story. Today's case takes place in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Myrtle Beach is a vacation resort city. The city includes 60 miles of beaches and a boardwalk with restaurants, stores, and amusement park. It is the 13th most populated city in South Carolina with over 35,000 people. It is normally a laid-back, safe city that is warm all year long. But in 2013, Heather Elvis would disappear, shaking the community up and leaving a family with no answers. 13 years later. On December 19th, 2013, an officer at Peachtree Landing around 4 a.m. was conducting a routine patrol. It is a small isolated boat ramp along the Waccamaw River. The officer pulled in and noticed a dark green Dodge Intrepid that appeared to be abandoned in the parking lot. He made a record of this vehicle and moved on. Later that day, police realized that the car was still in the same spot. So the officer went back to the vehicle to investigate, and there was no sign of a driver. He ran the license plates, and the car was registered to a Tammy Elvis. So they go to Terry's home to check whether they have a vehicle that might have been stolen. The family was confused and said that all their vehicles were in their driveway. This is until they said it was a green Dodge Intrepid. The car was used by their 20-year-old daughter, Heather Elvis, and should not have been abandoned, especially not at a secluded boat ramp. So I'm going to take a little detour. Who was Heather Elvis? Heather was born Heather Rochelle Elvis on June 30th, 1993, to parents Terry and Debbie Elvis. She was born and raised in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. This is a place known for spring break. Friends describe Heather as being outgoing but very easygoing. She was known to be kind, but never hesitated to stand up for people. She was quiet, but when around close people, she felt comfortable. She was spontaneous and sometimes rebellious. She was sort of a free spirit, which often led to tension with people because free-spirited people often longed to have control over their choices. She was very petite, standing at only 5'1". She was the middle child of 3 children. She had an older brother and a younger sister called Christopher and Morgan. Heather frequently gave back to her community by volunteering through a church, watching kids during mass at local daycare, and teaching children at an orphanage in Costa Rica to read. She also really loved animals. In 2011, Heather graduated from St. James High School. She loved doing hair and makeup since she was a little girl, so she began to take classes for cosmetology. After graduation, she began working as a hostess at the Tilted Kilt pub located on the beach on Broadway. This is a massive strip of businesses, restaurants, bars, stores, and an aquarium. There's a lot of foot traffic, so a busy place to work. Heather enjoyed this. I can completely agree to this. Many people dislike busy retail environments, but I prefer them. I keep busy and can actually function better with my ADHD in chaos. She enjoyed this job. Coworkers said that she was great to work with, very dependable, and rarely called out or was late. Shortly after graduating high school, Heather moved in with a boyfriend for a short time before moving into a place with her close friend and coworker Bree. Family's calls and texts to Heather went unanswered, and they had a spare key, so the family and police decided to check out her car. They got the car opened and saw that it was left as Heather normally would leave it. There was trash inside, but that was normal for Heather. She did leave her ID behind, but her purse and cell phone were missing. This showed everyone that she had no intention of being gone long. Sure, she took her purse and phone, but she left her ID. Unfortunately, they gave Terry the car to drive home. As you probably know, this is a massive mistake because any evidence that may have been there is now contaminated. Heather was scheduled that day to work at the Tilted Kilt, so the police decided to check there. As I said earlier, she loved her job and never missed work. Heather never showed up for her shift that day. Since her absence at work was out of character, a missing persons report was filed. No stone was left unturned. They spoke to everyone they could in her life, including family, friends, co-workers, and acquaintances. They even called hospitals, one of which said there was a woman named Heather Elvis had been in the night before her car was found and had checked herself out. It turned out to be a different girl with the same name. After hitting another dead end, police conducted a huge search at the Peachtree Landing around the banks of the Waccamaw River. They had K9 units, boats, and helicopters searching as well. There was just no sign of Heather. There was no sign of foul play. It honestly looked like Heather left on her own without her ID. But why? She even locked the doors and appeared she exited willingly. It was unlikely that she walked to wherever she went, because it was a long walk to get out of the boat area. Heather's story began to pick up traction among news outlets and trended with the hashtag Find Heather Elvis. Missing posters were hung up all over town. Next, investigators searched Heather's apartment. They looked at her phone records to find the answers. The family used social media to draw more attention to Heather's story and generate new leads. There are no signs to where she could be. Leading up to Heather's disappearance, she had a lot to look forward to. Her life was going so well. 2 days before she disappeared, Heather visited her family on the 17th. She was happy and told them that she had been offered a new job as a makeup artist, which has been a dream of hers. She also told them that she planned to go on a first date with a guy named Steven, who she had gone to high school with. Heather was in a happy, optimistic mood. The last confirmed sign of Heather was with Steven, so the police next stop was with Steven. He told police that they got dinner at a restaurant named Bandito's and then looked at Christmas lights. Steven even remembered the date as positive. Steven taught her how to drive his car that was manual. Heather sent a picture to her dad and her roommate Bree because they both tried to teach her without success. It was her way of bragging to them that he could teach her and they could not. Steven dropped Heather off at 1:15 a.m. on the 18th. This was confirmed shortly after he arrived home. Heather was getting over a pretty traumatic breakup, and her date with Steven was a way for her to get back out there. Heather's family and police went to see if friends or coworkers knew anything that could lead to any answers. They all had the same name, a man named Sidney Moorer. Heather's family did not recognize the name as anyone of importance, but Bree knew him and passed along his phone number. When the family called the Sidney guy to ask if he knew anything, he screamed at them and hung up. Immediately, the family was horrified. Why was he so angry? And why was he so defensive? So in June 2013, while working at the Tilted Kilt, Heather noticed an older man she thought was attractive for some reason. Not to be shady, but he was nothing special. This was Sidney Moorer. Sidney was a maintenance man repairing the kitchen equipment at the bar. He owned his own business called Palmetto Maintenance and Cleaning Service, LLC. He was 37, and let me remind you, Heather was 20. Which is 17 years younger than Sidney. While this is not illegal, it's still concerning. She often updated her Twitter, and one of her early tweets about Sidney said, quote, "One of these days I will drag that man into a mop closet and have my way with him. Lord have mercy," unquote. This attraction that Heather felt was reciprocated by Sidney. Every time he would go into the Tilted Kilt to repair something, he would flirt with her. Then he began showing up on days when he was not working to socialize with her and bring her coffee and bagels and sometimes goodies. Soon Heather and Sidney started what was described as a fling. Soon it became more intense. I would not say serious, though, because Sidney was a married man. Not only was he married, but he had 3 children with his wife, Tammy. You would think this affair would be private, but everyone at the Tilted Kilt knew about the relationship, if you can call it that. Outside of the bar, they kept it on the down low until July 2013. She changed her relationship status on Facebook to in a relationship. Heather knew Sidney was married with children at this point, but he had a crazy hold on her. Again, I don't understand why, as he was nothing impressive. Heather's friends were against the relationship and would even call Heather pretending to be his wife to scare Heather away. But it was useless, as Heather was falling for this creep. Her friend described her as acting like a high schooler around him, getting all giggly, turning red, and just infatuated. They talked all the time, like 500 monthly texts back and forth. They would even meet in the parking lot outside the bar. I do not know how he kept this going for as long as he did, but of course they could not keep their affair from his wife for long. On November 2nd, 2013, 5 months after they began their affair, his wife, Tammy Moorer, found out. The affair continued for a few months until Heather and Sidney ended their relationship. I couldn't really find a reason, but I have my theories. On September 20th, 2013, Heather tweeted, quote, "Once upon a time an angel and a devil fell in love, and it did not end well." So this leads us to November 2nd, 2013 when Tammy eventually found out about Sidney's affair with Heather, and boy did she hit the roof. The day she found out, she called the Tilted Kilt repeatedly. Then Heather was bombarded with around 60 calls to her cell phone from the same number. When Heather finally answered, Tammy began berating her. She even got Sidney to tell her that he used her, he never cared about her, all this crappy stuff. This devastated Heather, as he had always given her the impression he wanted to leave Tammy for her. Unfortunately, this was just the beginning of Tammy's harassment to Heather. So who was Tammy? Tammy worked part-time as a travel agent, helping people book their Disney trip. This was the perfect job for Tammy, as she was a Disney adult. She was mostly at home with the kids, though. Their 3 kids were between the ages of 10 and 15. They homeschooled the kids and seemed very involved in their children's life. On paper, they seemed like the perfect couple, but that could not be further from the truth. When Tammy finds out about the affair, she beats the crap out of Sidney, according to his mother. She began handcuffing him to the bed at night so he could not sneak out and be with Heather or anyone else. She password protected his phone and was the only one who knew the number. She made him get a tattoo with her name across his lower abdomen. She told him that if he did not mess around with the girl, he would not have to get the tattoo. Talk about insecure. Why even stay with someone if you have to handcuff them to stop them from cheating? Tammy continued to call and harass Heather using both her and Sidney's phones. She demanded that she tell her who she is and meet her in person. She would say things like, quote, "The kids want to say hi. Sidney will be taking his last breath," as if she would care. Heather told Tammy that she was obsessed and that she did not need to worry about her anymore. Tammy responds by saying, quote, "By the way, Dad no longer owns a phone," unquote. Then began sending sexual pictures and video of herself and Sidney. At this point, Heather was terrified, as you could imagine. She was scared to leave work alone or just go anywhere alone. She was constantly looking over her shoulder. Then Tammy finally gave up, and she had not spoken to Sidney since the day Tammy found out and started the harassment. Honestly, I understand being upset that her husband cheated, but it was over. Let it go. Also, the only one who owes Tammy anything is her husband, and the affair was done and over with at this point. Sidney and Tammy seemed to be getting back to normal in their lives. They bought a black F-150 truck and went to California for 3 weeks to rekindle their relationship. They went to Disneyland during this trip with the kids. The trip happened between November 19th and December 11th. With harassment seemingly over, Heather was able to breathe and just go back to her normal life. Friends noticed that she had gained weight. At a job like the Tilted Kilt, you have to be measured for a uniform, and it's basically like a Scottish-themed Hooters. Her bra size seemed to increase by 3 cup sizes in a week. Weight gain could just be stress, but friends thought she was pregnant. She did post a tweet saying, quote, "Prego my ego," unquote, but claimed she was joking. Her manager said she took a test, but it said an error message. She never took another test to anyone else's knowledge. In December, Heather moved in with Bree in Carolina Forest along Myrtle Beach. Bree was actually going out of town to visit her father and grandmother in Florida. Heather would be at the place all alone. She went to her usual shifts, visited her father, and went on the date we discussed earlier. And that's what brings us back into the investigation. So the police found out about all this drama and immediately grew suspicious of the couple. It is too big of a coincidence that she is being harassed after having an affair with a married man, then disappeared, and the communication completely stopped. The police made their way to the Moorer residence on December 20th. They just happened to live a few miles from Peach Landing, where Heather's car was found abandoned. Sidney admitted to the affair with Heather, but said that he ended it. He did say he spoke to Heather on the 18th. At 6 a.m. This is hours after Stephen dropped her off. So now, the man she had an affair with, causing drama between Heather and his wife, was the last known person to talk to her. I think he thought this would be helpful, but it made him look more suspicious. Sidney said that he only spoke to Heather to stop her from contacting him after she kept trying to reach him. I think he was trying to set up a theory that she was distraught after being rejected and leaving town. This would be such an overreaction. I doubt the police was even buying this, as it was known that Tammy was harassing her, and Heather was ignoring them. The police looked at Heather's phone records, which showed that Heather had not spoken to Sidney in 6 weeks. This threw a whole wrench in Sidney's story. Heather received a call from an unknown number at 1:35 a.m. She was dropped off by Stephen around 1:15 a.m. She spoke to the caller for almost 5 minutes. She had no history of the number in her records, so it was a red flag to the police. They traced it to a payphone in Myrtle Beach. They spoke to Bree, Heather's friend and roommate. She was still in Florida, but spoke to Heather at 1:44 a.m. She was crying, saying Sidney called her. Sidney apologized to her for the awful things he had said. He told Heather that he did not mean it and that he was just scared. He asked to see her. This threw Heather for a loop. She did not know what to do, but Bree said not to meet him, to stay home and get some sleep. Heather agreed, but unfortunately we know this is not what she did. The curiosity got the best of Heather. She called the number twice, unaware it was a payphone. At 2:32, she called a third time. Then she went to a bar called Longbeards, where she would hang out with Sidney. She sat in the parking lot and called the number 6 more times. This seems excessive, but I think the curiosity got the best of her. Heather then headed back to her apartment. Heather called Sidney's personal cell at 3:16 a.m. I guess she assumed that the number he used was not his. He did not pick up. She called again at 3:17 and somebody picked up, presumably Sidney, and they spoke for 4 minutes. It's unknown what they discussed, but she left and drove to the Peachtree Landing, where a vehicle was later found abandoned. This is also 4 miles away from the Moorer home. At Peachtree Landing, she called Sidney 4 more times, but they went straight to voicemail. After the 4th call, her phone went dead and no longer pinged in her location, or at least her phone's location. It seemed as if it died, or if it was not turned on. This also proves Sidney lied, as her phone was already dead, so he did not talk to her at 6 a.m., and he certainly was not telling Heather to leave him alone. Going back to the 20th, when police went to the Moorer residence, an older man walked up to them. This was actually Tammy's father, who owned the home and actually lived next door. Immediately, he was aggressive towards them. He even said that there's nothing that he would not do to protect his daughter. Tammy eventually came out to speak with them. At first, she was trying not to cooperate, and she did not want Sidney to cooperate either. She did end up walking authorities around the property. The police noticed many exterior security cameras and a few inside the home, including one pointing at the stairs. They even had a room with several monitors to look at the footage, which seems very extreme. They asked to see the brand new Ford F-150, but Tammy said she did not have the keys, so they could not open it. She offered to show them their camper, but that did not give any answers. However, sitting inside the camper was a bag of cement mix, a shotgun shell, and a bottle of bleach. This is when they brought Sidney in for a formal interview. He claimed that Tammy and him spent the whole night together. They went to the bar, then Walmart, and then got home around 3:10 a.m. This was before Heather even left her home. He continued to say that he only spoke to her at 6 a.m. They asked him about the call from the payphone, but he denied that it was him. He actually tried to act clueless and asked if payphones were still a thing. Unaware to Sidney, the police went to the gas station where the payphone was located to reveal surveillance footage. They saw a black truck resembling the Moorer's truck at 1:33 a.m. A man gets out of the truck, uses the truck and leaves. This matches the call to Heather. It was grainy, so they could not confirm it was Sidney, but I mean, that'd be a crazy coincidence. Sidney admitted to calling her again, saying it was to ask to leave them alone. He claimed she kept leaving notes on his car, so he just wanted her to leave them alone. They had no proof she was even deceased, but had a gut feeling that he did something to her. They spoke to Tammy, and of course she was trying to make herself look innocent. She said Sidney had a relationship with Heather, but she had no hard feelings. She claimed they had an open relationship, and she would see other men too. While open relationships exist, police did not believe this because they had the evidence that Tammy was not okay with the relationship, the harassment, but also the reports of her controlling Sidney. He lived at the family's home, was handcuffed, not allowed to use his phone without permission. Also, friends said they stopped visiting the home because Tammy made them uncomfortable. Also, Sidney went from texting friends and Tammy to not texting at all, so this confirms that he had no access to his phone without Tammy's permission. They looked into Tammy's social media and found no evidence that she was seeing people too. This was until she found out about the affair. Then she began talking to men on dating sites and sending explicit pictures of herself from Sidney's phone. She also went with Sidney everywhere, and I mean everywhere. If he left the house, she did too. Then they saw that she was also stalking Heather. When Heather was working, they would be in the Tilted Kilt parking lot. When she was at home, the couple would be at the bar down the road. This stopped when they went to California. This would also explain the new vehicle, so Heather would not clock the stalking. What a bunch of freaks. Within hours of their return, the phone pinged in the areas near Heather. So much for fixing the toxic relationship. When she could get close enough, she would have her sister Ashley take pictures of Heather at work. That night when Heather disappeared, I said she went to a bar and it was called the Longbeards. The bar Heather went to look for Sidney at. Then the police went to Walmart to see what they bought. Tammy stayed in the vehicle while Sidney went inside to purchase a pregnancy test, then stopped at the gas station to call Heather. This became the working theory on motive was the pregnancy, not necessarily the affair. It fizzled out, but you know what would really hinder their marriage? A baby. Police did find an empty pregnancy test in Heather's apartment, but no test. Their belief was that the couple bought a test, lured Heather out to get answers, and then something bad happened. Police confirmed that when Heather called Sidney's cell phone at 3:17, he was home, as they returned around 3:10. Between 3:30 and 4:30 a.m., Sidney and Tammy's phones were turned off. This was around the time that Heather called when meeting up with Sidney. At 4:37, Sidney and Tammy text each other for the first time in 6 weeks. They obtained a warrant to check their locations using Google Maps, which provides more accurate results because it relies on GPS signals rather than pings from nearby towers. Unfortunately, they mentioned this to Sidney, so by the time they got the warrant, he had deleted his Google data and his account, and deleted his information. They were able to see that he was in the general area. About this information, Sidney said that he did not know why it would ping there, but later changed his story that he was there to have sex with his wife, Tammy. They also asked about buying the pregnancy test, but he said that the test was not for Heather, but for Tammy, but it was negative. They were discouraged, but decided to get surveillance between the Moorer residence and the Peachtree Landing. They saw a black truck headed to Peachtree Landing at 3:45 a.m. and returned towards the home at 3:55 a.m. They remember the couple had a security system but actually tore it down and got a new one after the police left. Tammy claimed it broke, but other people said it worked just fine. They could not retrieve footage from the old equipment but saw incriminating events on the new one. On December 21st, the Center for Missing Persons joined the search for Heather Elvis. The family also started the Find Heather Elvis page, offered a $1,000 reward for any valuable information. 2 days after the initial visit, on December 22nd, Tammy, Sidney, Ashley, and Ashley's boyfriend detailed the truck. This is a brand new truck, so it should not need to be cleaned like that. We're talking power washing, specifically the passenger seat. This gets even stranger when Sidney starts burning rags in the yard, which they use to clean. Tammy walks around the property with Ashley, shakes bushes, looks into them, and uses a mirror to look under the edges of the fountain. She continues this inside the home. It seems that she was looking for bugs from the police. This is all circumstantial, but the police felt like they had strong evidence. That same day, there was a vigil for Heather, and the family also increased the reward to $10,000. Searches continued both on land and water. They specifically searched the Winyah Bay. They found human remains, which turned out to belong to a male. Again, the family increased the reward. Meanwhile, the family's first Christmas without Heather arrived. Heather went missing days before Christmas. The family decided to celebrate the holiday and record the whole thing so Heather could watch when she returns, which just breaks my heart. The reward was increased several times, but by January 20th, it was $30,000. Then we have Sidney and Tammy's shady behavior, if it could get any worse. Sidney began filing complaints, alleged harassment. Tammy took to social media and posted that Heather was an awful person. She said Terry, Heather's dad, was harassing her family. One of those posts said, quote, "Well, Sidney cheated on me in the months of September and October with a psycho whore who has since gone missing, and now her crazy daddy is threatened to kill my children and Sidney, therefore making Sidney stupid. This girl grabbed his business card out of the office at her workplace and had fantasies about him as far back as March, but talked about it in July. I don't know any other word to describe my husband at this point. All you have to do is research this girl's Twitter. Although 4 months of it has gone missing in the past couple of weeks. Her Tumblr, to see what a twisted person she truly is. I could care less since I've had a boyfriend of my own for the past couple years, but when someone brings my children into this, it's a whole other story. I will not tolerate anyone hurting my children because my husband banged a hoe 3 times in the backseat of her car and nothing more. I could care less about what he screwed around with, but the fact that this jerk is stalking my family is unacceptable," unquote. Terry said that he was the only one being harassed. On February 4th, Terry said that a black Jeep drove by his work and it was 2 men yelling, quote, "Heather was first, Morgan is next," unquote. There's no CCTV of this, unfortunately, but I tend to believe Terry over them. They spread lies about Terry, tried to shift the suspicion to him. Soon a rumor spread online that he was abusive to his wife. He was asked by a person who the family had known for 25 years, who had asked him if he abused Debbie. They even tried to scare the family by taking pictures of him at work, church, and just around and about. Some people even said that they were close enough to smack him in the head. Do you think the harassment stopped there? Of course not. The IRS contacted them about owning yachts and race cars that they did not claim. They even reported all these allegations to stop Morgan from participating in Miss South Carolina. Tammy and Sidney had Facebook pages supporting them. One of them had a Monopoly board featuring the members of the Elvis family. They even posted a picture of Morgan with a noose around her neck, planning to kidnap her. These sick freaks. Unfortunately, the police could not really do anything. Somehow, this got even worse. Terry was at the Chick-fil-A parking lot. He saw someone following him. He thought it was Tammy, and then he saw a gun. It turned out to be Ashley, Tammy's sister. When police came out, Ashley said that she did not have a gun, that she was just taking pictures. Why does she even need to take pictures? It's weird. The police found hundreds of photos of the family. The Elvis family attempted to press charges, but the police said that there were no pattern. Is having hundreds of family pictures not a pattern? They could not check a car as she only gave permission to check her phone, so they could not confirm if she had a weapon. Seems like they had probable cause with pictures, and Terry said he saw a gun, but anyways. Later that night, while he was in his driveway, Terry was shot 4 times. It is believed that he was not hit because his trash can shielded him. Police opened an attempted murder investigation, but no one was ever arrested for that. On January 28, 2014, William Christopher Barrett and Garrett Ryan Starnes were arrested and charged with obstruction of justice. They posted false information about the case on social media. This wasted time and diverted police in Heather's case. Both men were able to post bail. Garrett's charge was originally dismissed in April when the charging officer missed the trial. He made a mistake and thought the case was continued. Garrett was indicted in July. Sidney reported to the police that he was shot at or threatened with weapons 2 separate times. He said bullets hit his vehicle when he was with family, but when the deputy sheriff investigated, there were no evidence of bullet holes. He also said that his family received threats and that his pets were killed and mutilated. He posted signs about these threats. On February 21st, police executed a search warrant on the property. Police searched for 11 hours. The condition was alarming. There was rotten, moldy food just lying around. They had guns everywhere. Remember, they had children. It was not said what they found, but at this point they arrested Sidney and Tammy Moorer. They're both charged with murder, kidnapping, obstruction of justice, and 2 counts of indecent exposure. The indecent exposure charges originated from explicit pictures found on their phones of them in public places. The obstruction charges stemmed from him lying to the police about the payphone call to Heather. They posted $20,000 bond for their obstruction of exposure charges. They waived the bond on the kidnapping charges for the murder charges. In March, the police imposed a gag order on all participants in the case. In June, they added Medicaid to the couple's charges because they did not disclose their income to businesses on an application that exceeded $10,000 in 2007. In early 2015, the couple was released from jail after they put up Tammy's mother's house as collateral for the $100,000 bond for the murder charges. The Elvis family was against the release, mostly because of the threats they received. The court required Sidney and Tammy to agree to GPS monitored and stay 5 miles away from the family. Sidney and Tammy were allowed to move to Florida since they due to threats they allegedly received. Sidney found work there. They were required to comply with the bail conditions and to waive extradition if they violated them. In March 2016, the murder charges were dropped without prejudice. This means that if police want to charge them with murder again, they can. They also dropped the indecent exposure charges and Tammy's obstruction charge. They were still charged with Medicaid fraud. The Elvis family was disappointed but understood why it was done, so that if evidence or Heather's body was found, they could still be charged with murder. It was unlikely they would have been charged with murder, so it was just for the best for the case. There isn't enough solid evidence to prove it, but I believe these two are responsible, allegedly. I talked about the gag order that all people involved in this case were under. Well, information from legal documents, including search warrants, phone records, and other evidence were leaked online. The only people who would have had access to this would be the authorities and attorneys. It is believed that Sidney and Tammy did this because if everything was public, they could not get an unbiased jury. Seems plausible, honestly. They already had only circumstantial information. This basically threw that out. In June 2016, the trial to decide if Sidney kidnapped Heather or not began. So I looked this up, and in South Carolina, kidnapping can be charged if someone is convinced to leave the location on false pretenses. The prosecution is arguing that Sidney lured her out, then whatever happened caused her disappearance. Even if they did not harm her, they got her out of her home and she is missing. Her co-workers testified about their affair with Sidney. They even mentioned how she believed she was pregnant. Phone and video records connected Sidney to Heather on the morning of December 18, 2013. Jury members went on trips to see Peachtree Landing and the Moorers' home. Brianna, Heather's roommate, testified on the last day of trial. She discussed the affair and the last time they spoke, urging Heather to sleep on it. She's very emotional about the last conversation. The defense tried to bring up a past abusive relationship and friction with her family. They tried to motion for a direct verdict of not guilty. Basically, this takes the decision away from the jurors because the argument is one-sided. The judge denied this. The defense then rested its case, saying that the cause was circumstantial, and the only thing that they proved was that Heather had an affair. Heather did not have an affair. Sidney's nasty ass did. The jury deliberated for 7 hours, but they were irreconcilably divided. 2 of the 12 jurors did not want to convict. I did find out that one of the 2 jurors against the charge was friends with Sidney's attorney. This ended in a mistrial. Sidney motioned for a change of venue, which was granted and set for Georgetown. Sidney spoke to the media on a second day of trial. This violated the gag order, and the judge charged him with contempt of court. He was sentenced to 5 months in jail for talking to the media. He was released after 2 months for good behavior. When released, his dumbass spoke to the media again, saying the jury was not impartial and the case was malicious prosecution. He alluded to the fact that Terry mistreated Heather and something happened when Heather was 4. I think he's trying to insinuate that Heather was molested by her father. I do not believe him. He's trying to direct attention to her dad. No one close to Heather or the family knows what he's even talking about. In July 2017, the case resumed with a hearing to determine if Tammy had violated her gag order. The reasons for this or its outcome was never made public. Sidney was then tried for obstruction charge. They focused on the phone records and video footage, which proved he lied about calling Heather from the payphone. They said that he eventually fessed up to this lie when confronted with the evidence, but hindered the investigation. A cousin of Tammy's also testified and said that Sidney showed him something on his phone that made him believe he knew more than he was telling police. Later, in March 2021, on a Dateline episode, police confirmed it was a picture of Heather, deceased, with blood on her shirt and scratches to her face. Sidney was found guilty of the obstruction charge and sentenced to 10 years in prison, the maximum for this offense. Of course, you know, this idiot lawyer tried to appeal his ruling, saying that they only charged him because of his underlying allegation, and while Sidney had indeed lied to the police, he did not seriously hinder the investigation, and prosecutors were, quote, just trying to put somebody away so they can say they put somebody away. In April 2018, Sidney and Tammy were both indicted on 1 count each of conspiracy to kidnap Heather Elvis. These details have been kept close to the prosecutor's vest because of the gag order. In 2019, Sidney was convicted of kidnapping Heather. He also appealed the obstruction charge, saying that he should have been granted the directed verdict because the evidence was insignificant. Bro, you were caught on camera backed up by phone records. His conviction was upheld. He appealed to the South Carolina Supreme Court, and they agreed with the lower court's finding. In October 8, 2018, Tammy's trial for kidnapping Heather occurred. They talked about everything that they did with Sidney's trial. They introduced harassing messages Heather received from Tammy. Sidney's mother testified that Tammy beat him after finding out about the affair. They also introduced sexually explicit texts that Tammy sent her lover. The defense sought a mistrial, arguing that it put Tammy in a bad light and precedence against the jury against her. She was upset about Heather harassing her family, not the affair. Tammy testified that she met with Heather and they resolved any issues that they had. So why was she trashing Heather if this was true? She'd probably want her to be found. She announced that she and Sidney had separated because she was upset he did not testify in his defense. Tammy's defense planned to have 5 witnesses, including her children, mother, and an unidentified person, but they watched the trial coverage so they could not testify. Crazy that she's bringing her children into this. A deputy sheriff actually caught them watching on a laptop while they were waiting to testify. Ashley Cation and Tammy testified to basically prove the prosecution wrong. She said that Sidney got the tattoo in 2012 before he met Heather. She said she had proof in the form of text messages. If true, she could have given it to the police. She said that Tammy handcuffed Sidney only for role playing, not out of jealousy, and only for a short time, not while sleeping. The prosecution reminded her that she said otherwise in a police interview. Ashley was watching the children the night of the disappearance of Heather until 3:10 a.m. This is when Tammy and Sidney arrived home, according to a text. The children walked back home because Ashley was a neighbor and they remembered Tammy's family living nearby. Sidney Moffitt, a former roommate of Heather, testified about the abusive ex of Heather. She said that Heather came home one night in 2012 with bruises on her neck, but did not explain. She also said that they were not seeing each other that much at this point. Tammy testified that the handcuffing thing was impossible because they had a sleigh bed, so there's no way to handcuff him. She said that at first she was mad about their affair, but by the time they returned home from Disneyland, she was over it. She said the night of December 18th, 2013, they had sex in the truck and bought a pregnancy test because they were trying to have a baby, but it was negative. This makes zero sense. Most people who are pregnant do not have sex before they take a test, whether they want a baby or not. So she's full of shit, stupid, or both. She said that they got home at 3:10 a.m. She cleaned up because she still had things to do after the trip back from Disney. Sidney did talk to Heather, but he said he never left the house. The trial lasted 11 days and the jury convicted Tammy of both charges after deliberating for 4 hours. She was sentenced to 30 years for each, served concurrently. Tammy announced that she would appeal because the evidence was purely circumstantial. Terry Elvis was arrested and charged with contempt. Apparently, he yelled and cursed at the lawyer, Sidney Moorer, in the bathroom. He was not allowed to have any verbal contact with the Moorers or their attorney. Terry's lawyer said that he admitted the contact, but he never cursed at them. He said that the Elvis family had a bathroom for them only, and the lawyer used it. Terry was found guilty and fined $400. He agreed to pay, although it felt like that this was misguided. In September 2019, Sidney was also found guilty of kidnapping and sentenced to 30 years. Both Sidney and Tammy filed appeals of their convictions in 2020, but both were denied. In 2021, he tried again, but this was also denied. In 2023, Tammy appealed hers again, and it was also denied. Unless someone's dumb enough to improve an appeal, Tammy and Sidney are not eligible until 2044 and 2046, respectively. Terry said that hearing Tammy utter Heather's mouth felt like he was being stabbed in the chest. The way that she smiled to try and charm the jury, but could not look at the attorney when talking about Heather. The investigation is still open today, hoping to find evidence for the murder charge. The working theory is that they found out that she was possibly pregnant. She met up with Sidney. She got off her car, grabbed her phone and purse, got into his truck. At some point, Tammy was involved. Either she was hiding in the truck or he drove her to his house under the pretense of maybe Tammy wasn't there or God knows what. As of May 2026, Tammy is awaiting on her appeal request. Heather has not been found. She's been missing for almost 13 years. She would be 33 years old in June 2026. She should be working as a makeup artist and hopefully would have found a real man, get married, and have kids if that's what she wanted. Heather's case is so heartbreaking. Sure, she made some mistakes, but she did not deserve whatever happened to her. She was torn apart by Tammy because Sidney had an affair with Heather. Heather was not the married one. She owed nothing to Tammy. Tammy has every reason to be mad at Sidney and upset about the affair, but hating Heather was crazy. Honestly, I think she was just jealous of Heather. Sorry, not sorry. I'd like to share some advice to help people to avoid cases like this. For the cheater, just leave and do not help your spouse get rid of the mistress. For the spouse, leave them. They do not care. You deserve better, except for Tammy, she's trash. For friends and family of people who know their friends are in relationships like this, do not judge. Support them in ending it. And for the Heathers of the world, you deserve more than some loser who cheats on his wife. What do you believe was the thing that pushed Tammy over the edge? I want to know your opinion, but please be respectful. If you're a judgmental dick, you will be removed and blocked. Comment, subscribe, and if you have any future cases you'd like me to cover, please request a case using my form in the description box. Join me next time when I discuss a brutal murder out of Japan for Wicked Wednesday. Until next time, stay curious, cautious, and safe.